AFIO Now is presented by Northwest Financial Advisors, where our world revolves around you.
Hello, everyone. This is Jim Hughes with AFIO Now. We are a program of recorded interviews with senior U.S. intelligence officers who have great presentations to make. And today we have a very special topic and two very expert speakers. We're going to be talking about open source intelligence, OSINT. And to help me today as co-host and interviewer, I'm very pleased to welcome back Jennifer Daniel. Jennifer had a 37-year career in the U.S. intelligence community, primarily with the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency in a number of senior positions, and I'm happy to say is also an AFIO board member. Jennifer, welcome back to AFIO.
Thanks for the warm welcome, Jim. I'm happy to be here today, and I think that we are very fortunate to be able to interview Dennis Eger and Shawn Nilius on the Army's open source intelligence activities. So Dennis is the senior advisor for Army OSINT and reports directly to the Army G2. He works inside and outside the Army on all aspects of OSINT. His focus is on the development of OSINT capabilities, the policy, the doctrine, tactics, techniques, and procedures. So everything you need in order to make the Army effective. He integrates it across the defense intelligence enterprise as well as the intelligence community. We also have Shawn, who is the director of the Army OSINT office, and he focuses on activities inside the Army for the most part. His office provides technical oversight, compliance, management, and governance of open source activities and synchronizes resourcing and requirements across the Army intelligence and security enterprise. Welcome, Dennis and Shawn.
Hey, thanks.
Set the stage for our discussion today. Oh, okay. Sorry, I didn't pause long enough. You're welcome. To set the stage for our discussion, could you please describe open source intelligence and how it differs from publicly available information and media reporting?
Yeah, so I'll go ahead and start that, and then I'll hand it over to Shawn. So I think it's important. I think it's a very important question because there's a lot of confusion, right? So PAI, or publicly available information, is a part of open source intelligence. But when we look at publicly available information by itself on the surface, we're talking about typical business that we do on the internet or things that we can get publicly from say, a Google search. Well, a lot of times we like to put it into the perspective of the iceberg. And there's a part of the iceberg that you see above the water, and then there's the part below the water that you don't see. What you see above the water is the publicly available information piece. That's typical searches, Google searches that you do, that anybody can do if they have a question and they're gaining access to that information because it's publicly available. When you get into it specifically, you're talking about that part of the iceberg that's below the water. You're talking about things that, although they are publicly available, without specific training, tradecraft to put against it, you wouldn't typically find those things. And that's where the intelligence lies when you talk about it. Now, we also say it requires you to have the authorities and the mission to be able to do what you're doing. But again, you have to have an intelligence requirement as well. So that's where this differs, where OSINT differs from just regular publicly available information. I have an intelligence requirement. I have a requirement from a commander that says, go collect ABC. So you're actually doing collection. You have tradecraft, you have training, you have mission, and you have authorities. That's wholly different from somebody just searching the internet. Shawn?
Yeah, the only thing I think I would add to that is just an intelligence professional, right? So intelligence professionals have laws, regulations, and rules we have to follow. And so taking an intelligence professional, because we're now moving into intelligence, and as Dennis said, having the authority, the mission, the equipment, the training, the certification, everything needed to actually truly go against that commander's intelligence requirement and go and physically collect it.
All right, thank you. I thought that was a really good explanation. I particularly like the description of it as an iceberg, where the publicly available information is above the water, but then you have to dig deeper in order to find those specific things that a commander needs in order to do his or her mission. So as I've gone through the different documentations and strategies, they're all saying open source is referred to as the intelligence discipline of first resort. Could you tell us why that is?
Yeah. So again, I'll jump in and then hand it over to Shawn. Yeah, that's pretty important. We started really pressing that probably about 2 years ago when we talk about the INT of first resort. It really started to take hold and come to light when the war in Ukraine kicked off. And because you're in an environment where you're not directly involved in the fight, like the US wasn't at war, then you're not going to have traditional intelligence collection platforms that we're also used to being used in those environments. So you have to be able to do intelligence collection a different way. And so open source intelligence or open source publicly available information gives you just this wealth of incredible information at your fingertips, right? That I don't need a traditional collection platform, for instance, to be able to get to it. Because it's things like videos that somebody posts or things that they write on social media. Those are things that your traditional intelligence is not going to pick up, yet from an open source perspective, you can. But then in doing so, we say that is used to tip and cue all of the other intelligence disciplines. And so that's where this idea of first resort comes from. If we have an intelligence requirement, let's see what we can pick up out there in publicly available information, kind of in the open channels. Let's put our collectors on it. And then if we find something, we then pass it like we normally would to our all source folks who then fuse it with all of the other intelligence disciplines or tip and cue the other intelligence disciplines. And so if you take it from an example perspective, if I was to see a video on social media in Ukraine of Russian tanks moving down a particular highway, and I'm getting that from a video from social media, I can say I can get that pretty quickly because someone will grab it, they'll post it, and we'll have it almost immediately. So I can take that then, and then I can pass it on to our all source folks who then tip and cue and say, well, look, maybe from a GeoInt perspective, let's have the GeoInt folks confirm it from a satellite image. And then they can do that. Then they can task it and say, yep, that's what it is. And then you can target it, right? So it can tip and cue very quickly, much quicker than a lot of other intelligence discipline can. So that's kind of why we look at it as first resort. Let's go there first, tip and cue everything else to verify and target. Shawn?
Yeah, I think I would add, I think the speed is what's critical. If you think about when the Russians invaded Ukraine, it was a Ukrainian citizen with a phone standing there literally filming live as the Russians crossed the border. You just can't beat that kind of speed. The second thing I would get to, when we talked about the iceberg, we talked about maybe 3 or 4% of publicly available information that's out there is easily accessible versus the rest. I think the other thing I would highlight is, and this number changes and it continues to climb, about 85% of all information available in the world right now is publicly available. So, and that number continues to grow. So from an open source intelligence perspective, there's so much data that's available that's now publicly available. And then the speed that we're talking about, when you combine those together, that's why we call it the end of first choice or first resort. And then again, as Mr. Eger mentioned, just the fact that it can tip and cue so many others as well as feedback coming back to it.
Okay, thanks. I think there's a couple of my takeaways from that for me is that the wealth of the information is everywhere. So no matter where you are, and you don't even need an established infrastructure or the big network. You just need to be able to get to that social media and dip below. And then for verification, you can tip and cue the other ends. Now, if you tip and cue the other ends and use commercial imagery, unclassified commercial imagery combined with open source, does that change the classification or who can see that information at all? Or does it remain as open source intelligence?
Yeah, no, I think it still remains as open source intelligence, and it doesn't necessarily change the classification. When we get into changing classification, it really comes down to the intelligence requirement. If the collection that we're doing, even publicly on publicly available information, if that collection can get at or allow the enemy, based on the way them seeing the way we're searching potentially, if it can give away what our intelligence requirement is, then we're talking, we probably need to classify it, right? But in general, this information is unclassified, right? So it's a discussion that we have across the intelligence community quite a bit, is when we talk about that information and whether it should be classified and to what level it should be classified, is to always, we always have to remind ourselves that the information itself is unclassified. Right. We should not be trying to overclassify unclassified information. If it's going to give something away that we're doing, or a position that we're taking, or a direction that we're going, okay, got it. But we should be very careful not to overclassify those things.
Great. Thanks, Dennis. Every question I ask, I think of another follow-up. But I do think it's important to not overclassify it. And I think that people tend to overclassify it just to make sure they are not giving away anything that is the intent of why we need it or what that requirement is. I'm going to move on to the next question, which is, what sets or problems, what mission sets or problems benefit the most from Army OSINT? And as always, if you could just provide us with an example.
I'll start and pass it over to Shawn. I think it's hard to say from a mission set perspective, only in that there is so much that you can get and that you can use it against any mission, right? So when you think about the fact that everybody, I'll use the example of videos, right? Like everybody has a phone now, and everybody has a phone that takes video and takes pictures and make movies and do all these things in the palm of your hand. What we never pay attention to, though, is when we load those things up, that they've now become publicly available, right? And so we get a wealth of information from videos. And so I use the example of, let's say there's somebody sitting in Ukraine or one of the countries around that area, and they live near railroad tracks. And all of a sudden they see a train coming through with this weird equipment on the back that they're not sure what it is, they've never seen before. Yet they have a phone and they begin to take video of it. And they load that up and they say, they load it onto some social media platform and they say, hey, this train is like going through my backyard with all this equipment on it. I don't know what this is. Well, now that's intelligence, right? Like it's publicly available. We can pull that. We can look at it. We know what the equipment is. We can see what weapon systems are on the equipment. You can look and see, hey, wait a second, there's snow. There's 6 inches of snow on the beds of these rail cars. So why is there 6 inches of snow? Where did it come from? Why didn't the snow melt? Or there's a bunch of snow on the tires or on the vehicles, and you're like, okay, they must have traveled a long way. They weren't just loaded. They weren't like, you can gain just this wealth of information. All of that important when you talk about trying to gain an advantage over the enemy, but trying to gain insight into what they're doing. I think one of the other big mission sets that the publicly available or the OSINT piece can get you as well is there's a lot of countries doing a lot of research on a lot of stuff. And they put that on maybe websites or libraries, et cetera, in their own countries and bury it, so to speak, that the normal person wouldn't know is there. But from an OSINT collection standpoint, you can find that stuff. And then that becomes useful. But it's no different than what the enemy is doing to us. A lot of the research that we have is out there online somewhere. They've just got to dig and find it. And so that's something that when you talk about regular media sources and stuff of the olden days of whether it's TV, newspapers, you really weren't able to access some of that stuff. Now that it's all online, it's in libraries, it's public events, you're able to get to all of it. That provides just an incredible wealth of information. Shawn?
Yeah, I think the biggest benefit for the Army too is, we already talked about it in the previous question, this operating at a tactical edge based on what systems you're going to fight on out there. I think the fact that when you add in speed and the classification, and those that are at the tactical edge happen to share with other partners out there, OSINT is much faster and better at that than I would say the other INTs, based on what we previously discussed. I think that'd be about the only thing I would add at this point.
So the next question I have is the amount, and it gets to your point about it being that there's a wealth of information there, and there's a wealth that you can gain from videos. So that has expanded rapidly over the years, and it continues to increase. I mean, I don't know how many days I can see something that's out there or see the open source intelligence that's being reported. That it just amazes me, considering where we were when I started almost, I think, 40 years ago now, as to how, if you really want to know what's going on in the country, you couldn't get it from social media. And now we see a lot of things where somebody accidentally takes a selfie with information that's in the background that is valuable to us, but they didn't even think it was important. So in that world, how do you decide what to collect? And how are your requirements set?
So I'll let Shawn, as former G2 excellence, go ahead and start that one. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I mean, first thing, it ultimately comes down to what's the collection requirement. What are you trying to answer for the commander to do that? So I've got an example that I like to use. Okay. So when the Russians invaded into Ukraine, I remember seeing on TV the little ticker on the bottom of the news thing, and it said something about a BTG in Ukraine. Okay. So I decided, well, I'm just going to Google what's BTG. So I Google it. It tells me Battalion Tactical Group, the smallest combined arms element within the Russian army. It's like, okay, well, that's good to know. Then I just mentioned it to my commander, and my commander's like, hey, Shawn, how many of those does Russia have, and how many of those are inside Ukraine? That's the collection requirement, because that's the commander directing collection. And now I'm going to go out and use OSINT as well as other ends to go and find that answer. Okay, so now I can drill into that and answer that collection requirement, that there's X number that the Russians have, and then there's X number that are in Ukraine. Of course, the next intelligence requirement is, well, where are they located? And so you can just continue to drive the collection on that. That's just one example, but the point being that commanders or D2s or seniors are going to direct what it is that they need to answer, or what in intelligence gaps are out there to drive that collection.
Yeah, and I'd just add one piece to that, right? So there's the other things that kind of drive collection. We have to think at the national level. There are some very specific things at the national level across the IC that they are looking at and they want, and OSINT can help answer some of those things that are set at the national level that they want information on. Also, for us, things are set, of course, regionally as well. So the Pacific may not be looking at the same thing as Europe, right? As USOEUR, and neither of those might be looking at what Southcom wants to look at, right? So USOEUR may be setting collection requirements or setting collection things from a Ukraine or a Russia perspective, USOPAC from a China, Taiwan perspective, Southcom, anything South America, drug-related kind of thing. Like, so they all, based off of regional mission sets, are going to drive. That's going to drive what the OSINT collection is, which is good for. It's good for us in the way we've built out OSINT in the Army, in the sense that our OSINT collection teams, we've built very specific teams of OSINT collectors, and we've put them in all intelligence organizations. And in doing so, that then makes those collection teams very regionally specific as well. So, but then I've got organizations that support the kind of the Army level and the national level. So it really is dependent on each of those areas, very regionally specific.
Okay, great. Thank you. I think that was a great explanation. I'm going to follow that with, how is open source information distributed to those who need it in the Army and elsewhere in the community? And how difficult is it to get to the tactical edge in the time that is needed by someone who is out there? with very little to work with.
Hey, Dennis, why don't you start with answer the hard problem?
I realize that stuff. An old boss of mine used to say.
Well, if you don't want to talk about it, we can move on to something else.
No, it's good. An old boss. An old boss of mine used to say to me, "Fun stuff, hard stuff," and he would point to me and he'd say, "You get the hard stuff, I get the fun stuff." So I'm gonna say this is hard stuff. I'm gonna send it to Shawn initially, and then I'll take it after. So go ahead, Shawn.
Yeah, well, I think a couple things on it. So first of all, from a management perspective, with the Army OSINT office, we have the Army's collection manager. Okay, and so we work and with our working groups that we have to work and coordinate and deconflict what's being collected. And the reason I'm highlighting this first is once you've got that, who's producing what, Dennis kind of talked about the different theaters, right? Then we can get into how are we distributing it, okay? So you start with that, and then being tied in at both the defense and the national level as well when it comes to collection management is a way of trying to tie all that together. Now, what I will say is we're not there yet. We are very close to rolling out a new capability that will allow us to automate for both speed and standards open source intelligence reporting for the Army, and we're working with other services and agencies on that capability to ultimately roll that out. Let me pause there and let Dennis add on a few more things, because I know he's got a couple things he wants to hit on that, and then we'll try to clean that answer up even more.
No, thanks, Shawn. Yeah, so can we disseminate to the tactical edge? Absolutely. Can we get it there to answer questions that the commander wants and fairly quickly? Yes. Were we always there? No, absolutely not. Like we've learned a lot of lessons ourselves as well with things like Ukraine. We could get open source intelligence reporting to the tactical edge. We could get it there fairly reasonably, right? But what we realized was, like many intelligence disciplines, when we say, can we get it there faster, right? And what's the goal and how are we going to get it there? So for us going forward, yeah, we have a plan in place. We have repositories where things are. We have capabilities to get it out there. But for Shawn and I, it's not fast enough. And so where I would like it to be, when I say I want near real-time open source intelligence reporting at the tactical edge, to me, near real-time is within 5 minutes of event. That's near real-time. Now, there will be a lot of folks throughout the IC that would say that's impossible. It may be. That's my goal. From the time that something is happening, a live video that we pick up, to be able to get that near real-time within 5 minutes, so that decisions can be made, tip and cue other intelligence discipline, and potentially target. That's where we have to be, in my opinion, that fast. Otherwise, with the way information changes on the internet, if you don't act fast, it becomes irrelevant. I mean, those things are changing constantly. So yes, we have systems in place. Yes, we can do it, but yes, we want to be better. And I think our commanders and folks on the ground deserve better, right? So yeah, so we're there, but we're just not satisfied. So in our modernization efforts, we're looking hard at what makes it faster.
Hey, Jennifer, if I could add to that.
Go ahead, Shawn.
Yeah, because you had brought it up. I think the other thing is, if you want to keep it get it out to the tactical edge, don't overclassify it. Okay? Because as soon as you do that, now you're moving it to levels that we're not going to get it out to the tactical edge. And again, we've already talked about the fact that it's publicly available, unclassified information to begin with. So I just think that's another point. That's part of our drive too, is not to overclassify something. I mean, if it needs to be classified, we completely understand that. But in most cases, we're open down so it can really get to the tactical commanders at the tactical edge to make key decisions.
And I think that is important, is that information at the tactical edge is most valuable when it's near real time. Because anything longer, it could put them at risk, or they may not know of a threat that's coming, so then they have to veer in a different way or even go back. And I think that a goal of having it within 5 minutes is a great goal. It may take you some time to get there, but I think that's an excellent starting point. So you've touched on this a few times in this conversation about how it can be shared with others. But have you increased the amount of intelligence you can share with international partners? And could you give us an example of it?
Yeah, I'll kick off really quickly. If you look at our strategy, we published our OSINT strategy about, I guess it's probably about a year ago now that it's been on the street. And one of the major lines of effort within that strategy revolved around allies and partners. So how do we modernize? How do we collect? How do we share information? Everything about allies and partners. And here's the tricky part to this is it's not that we can't share, because we actually are in a position. We have systems in place where our OSINT reporting is put on those systems and disseminated to our allies and partners. So they are getting our information through certain architecture channels. The challenge, though, becomes every country has different laws on how they can use or collect publicly available information when it comes to privacy, as an example. And so really it's aligning what can and can't be done in each country, and then looking at the specific fibers where there are things that each of our countries can do that allows us to share versus things that potential laws will not let us, right? So that's something very, very serious that we've got to look at. We're really, really nested, especially in Europe with our European partners. Our MI brigade over there, the 66th MI brigade, really has just a Herculean effort with allies and partners going on from an OSINT perspective in working together in collection and sharing. So we're there. I think for me, the big thing in the future is how do I get not just how do I give them my information, how do I get their OSINT collection? That's kind of a tricky thing, again, based on what they can or can't collect and what they can and can't share because of laws. So that's kind of that piece that we're like, okay, how do we figure this out? Shawn?
Yeah, I would just add, I'll start with the dissemination piece. So yeah, we work very hard with allies and partners on disseminating, making sure they have access to what open source intelligence that the U.S. has produced, the Army has produced, and that we get access to theirs, and that we've got a place that we can share that. So that's part of the dissemination. I'd also say we do a lot of training together, okay? Both allies and partners, so a lot of training together. And then Dennis hit on it. We have several places across the Army where we do have embedded other partners that are embedded with us or working directly with us as a team to do OSINT together. So, and again, as Dennis hit on, based on what authorities and missions different organizations in different countries have. So, I'll just stop there. I don't think it's as hard as many people think that it is. Again, it goes back to the classification piece, but there's a lot of countries out there with a lot of capabilities. It's just a matter of all coming together. And I think it's been pretty easy under the OSINT umbrella for us to do that.
I think it's good to know that it is becoming easier. And I often forget, or I have to be reminded that every country has its own rules of what they can and can't do and how they can go about sharing. And the training exercises that we conduct with various countries, especially like in the Pacific with South Korea, helps us to be able to share better and identifies and sheds light on those areas that need to be improved. So good on you for looking at all of those different aspects of it. One of the key things I always think of is the ability to create false information is easier now than it has ever been with the proliferation of artificial intelligence. I'm amazed at some of the deep fake things that I see that are just online that people do for either fun or for political reasons. But how do you verify the veracity of the unclassified information that you use to produce open source intelligence? And can you provide an example where you identified that there was some false information and what you did to overcome it?
Yeah, I think this is a really good question, and I think it's something that we all that we all need to take, a very, very serious look at in the future. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not one of these guys that says we need to stop all AI and all machine learning and all this. Like, the reality is it's here, right? And this is what I tell people. These kinds of things are here. Now we have to figure out how to work within that context. And so when you talk about things like deep fakes, misinformation, disinformation, what we really need to invest in, that we are in the Army, is capabilities that helps us to detect those things much more quickly so that I don't have to have a collector spend an incredible amount of time trying to figure it out, right? Because what I tell folks now is whatever you're collecting on, if you have video, if you have a picture, image, or something, you can't trust. My advice is you can't trust anything now. So you have to verify it. And in doing so, they have to spend a lot of time really using tradecraft and other means to figure out whether it's real, fake, misinformation, disinformation. If I can get something, if I can have a capability that does that quickly for me, it now frees up my collector to do more collection. It makes collection more timely, more relevant. So it's about the capability. Here's kind of an example that I use with folks early on in Ukraine. There was a video that surfaced of individuals of an airborne operation, an airborne jump into this airfield in Ukraine. Folks immediately started saying, the Russians are jumping in. The Russians are jumping in, right? We had a very seasoned OSINT collector that looked at it and said, hold on a second. We know there's misinformation and disinformation campaigns out there, right? Let's take a harder look at this before we jump and say that it is the Russians jumping into Ukraine. And when they did that, and they took a look at the video, and they went back through archives, a bunch of stuff. Anyway, they found out that it was a video of an airborne operation from back in 2014. It was not current day, right? But that was a seasoned OSINTer that said, hey, let's slow down and let's take a look at this. And I think we're there with everything. The amount of deep fakes that you see can be pretty alarming. I will say there are folks out there, primarily, not just in industry, but there are some universities from an academia perspective that are really doing great work tackling this kind of thing. I was at one particular university a few months ago, looking at their specific capability in building deepfakes. And then they were partnered with another university where their job was to figure out how quickly they can determine whether it was a fake or not. So between those two universities, they were playing cat and mouse. Let's see if I can get one over on that university, and the other university saying, let's see if we can figure it out. In doing so, what they're really doing is developing this technology that will help us identify these kinds of things more quickly. I'm going to another particular university this week to discuss kind of the same thing, that has done a lot of research on misinformation and disinformation narratives as they pertain to social networking kind of theory, in that they're working on or able to, they published some papers on it, able to isolate certain narratives. So let's say recently there was the narrative that the U.S. was developing chemical weapons or had chemical sites inside of Ukraine, right? And that kind of was on the news everywhere about, wait, the U.S. has these chemical sites in Ukraine? So what some of these technologies are able to do is they were able to isolate where that narrative started and who that narrative influenced or didn't influence. And then so you can take that information, because now the exact person that started it, when they started it, and who it reached. So now you can target that individual or that network of folks that are providing that misinformation. So I think we've got to leverage all of that going forward. That's how important it is. Shawn?
Yeah, I think really, I mean, it covers most of it. I would say it kind of boils down to two things, right? It's that we've highlighted, and that is, let's use technology to help us, right? If technology is being used to create these kind of problems, let's use technology to try to help us. And then the other part is clearly the trade crafts. Okay, and that's why we specifically focus on building true OSINT collectors that are properly trained, certified, and equipped with the capability to help identify these things and working the problem sets or the target sets that they have over and over, that they really understand their environment and will know things like, hey, I think I've seen that before, or that we can run it and track it down that something isn't really true, or it's just something that took place many years ago but was trying to get some kind of response.
So that training and making sure the experts have the tools and the knowledge of how to dig into it and find things like the video was 10 years old, I think is very important. Also, the work going on in academia must be fascinating, and to see how well they can do that. And that leads me to another question, because all of the students that I work with or speak with, they're amazing. And many of them are in national security and intelligence courses or programs at their university. But one of the questions I get, and some people are very irate or upset about it, is why is the DoD and the IC spying on me? What about using all of this information for intelligence reasons? What could you say to talk about how you protect the privacy of U.S. citizens?
Yeah, I'll start and then pass it over to Shawn, because he works the details of it. But from an overarching perspective, so it's important for us and to describe to folks, especially like we just came from Capitol Hill this morning, and we had the same exact discussion with staffers on Capitol Hill. Shawn and I are incredibly, and so is the Army writ large, we're incredibly concerned about the public's concern over privacy. I would tell you, we take great care in the information that we access to ensure that it does not include U.S. persons. And here's kind of how we do that, right? Anybody that we do business with, let's say that we're going to access their data or information that they've scraped the internet and that they're holding. It's a requirement for us that we levy on them that they have to clean the data before we ever even use it at all. Clean it in the sense that they have to make sure all U.S. persons' information is removed so that we can ensure that none of our collectors are actually accessing data that might even remotely have some kind of U.S. persons in it. So it has to be cleaned. After it's cleaned, they have to store that. They have to store it separately, away from all the other data that they collect, so that we don't have any kind of cross-contamination. And then we can access it from there. From that point, we have some internal things that Shawn can talk about that we do as kind of second and third steps. So we kind of have like a 3-step process to really make sure that that no one's privacy is violated, and that we're actually not collecting or accessing any information on U.S. persons at all. Shawn?
Yeah, so I'll take it kind of the next step. So I think the first thing for us, when we talk about the OSINT collector, Dennis hit on it, right? We're focused on the foreign enemy, okay? The second part of that is, as soon as we identify somebody that's going to be an OSINT collector, we send them through very detailed formal training. And I can tell you the first training they get right up front, which is quite a bit, is all about laws, regulations, rules, authorities, mission. We do that right up front so that they understand what those rules are. Because you kind of talked about when you talk to students, the nice thing is the younger generation understands technology. They understand information and where things are out there. So we start off with, okay, that's great. We know you're not to operate on the internet. Now let's teach you what you can and cannot do as an intelligence professional for the Army out there doing it. Once we've got you properly trained and certified, then we're going to equip you with the capabilities that Dennis just talked about, making sure that we've worked with that appropriate vendor to protect and remove U.S. persons' information, right, out of that, so you can do that. Once we do that, what I do, my office does for the entire Army, is we monitor all OSINT collector activity for the Army. We're watching what our collectors are doing. And if you do something, anything related to a U.S. person or anything else from a trade craft, illegal, anything like that, we're going to catch it. We're going to take corrective action from there, working with the unit to do it. There's multiple ways that we do that. The one specific I will get to you is if somebody has done something that we believe is incorrect, is not what they're supposed to be doing, and we task them to provide us the information so that we know and can justify what did or didn't take place. If they don't respond, I turn off their access. I control all access. The Army OSINT office controls all access, their accounts. I can literally turn them on and turn them off in seconds. I have that control to do. So that's our way that we ensure that we call it oversight and compliance. All those aspects are taking place.
And are you also working on capabilities to automate that? Because I can imagine the size that your office would have to be in order to be out there monitoring what all the collectors are doing.
Yes, we do. All that is automated. That's something we're continuing. That's part of our modernization aspect to continue to do that, again, using the technology that's out there to help us do that faster and better. The other thing that we've done, I do like to always share this for our collectors out there, we've created a self-report. So if you did something wrong, the second you do it, we've got basically a chat or a immediate availability for you to say, hey, listen, let me raise my hand. I did something wrong here. Let's identify that and then take corrective action. And then from a tradecraft side, we talk about the tradecraft. Sometimes somebody will do something that gets our attention and it was something they shouldn't be doing. We make sure that we correct them, but we get the word out to everybody. But sometimes people come up with tradecraft that's something that's good, that may speed up the process or something like that. And we want to share the good lessons learned as well.
You were breaking up a little bit, but I just want to make sure I heard you correctly when you said that there's a capability there for people to self-report. So as I go through it and realize, oh, wait a minute, I shouldn't have done that. They have like a help desk of people they can call to help them correct that problem. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah, correct. We have a means for them to self-report themselves immediately, so it's tagged, and then we can adjudicate that right away and just keep them collecting.
Great. So as I talk to people about open source and how it's being used in the community, I think that this conversation is important for people to understand that we take the responsibility seriously to protect U.S. persons and their information. So speaking of students, many of our members of the AFIO are professors and educators at colleges and universities. And the question is always, what skills do I as a student and what kind of training do I need to pursue in order to be a successful OSINT analyst? Or is just being proficient on the internet and being able to collect information on whatever my interests are enough?
Yeah, I think so. This is interesting. Because I have to look at this. I try to look at it from the lens of my son, who is in the Army as an all-source analyst, and myself. And I look at the generational gap, and I look at my ability to use the internet versus his ability to use the internet. I think that I have the ability to use the internet until I see him using the internet, and I realize I have no idea what I'm doing, right? I say that in jest, but the reality is kids today, their ability to search and live in that internet space it's unimaginable to me, that the way that they operate inside of that space. I would say that, at least from an Army perspective, if somebody was joining the Army, they were in the intel field, but prior to, they're like, what kind of skills would I need to do this OSINT thing? I would say, don't worry about it. I would say, don't worry about it, because we're going to train you on the OSINT skills necessary. What I need you to be is a good analyst. I need you to be able to do critical thinking. I need you to be able to question things like, this doesn't make sense, or that doesn't make sense, or really build a hypothesis, and how do I test that, and where do I go? Like, be inquisitive, and probably most of all, be a divergent thinker. Like, I need you to think like that, and we'll train you with the rest of it from all the skills. And my only other plug would be, there are a number of colleges and universities that I've visited over the last 6 or 8 months that have some fantastic intelligence undergraduate programs or graduate level programs. And they're doing some amazing things in those programs. So as an example, Mercyhurst University in Erie has an incredible undergraduate program. not only with that, they have an OSINT center. Like they know how to do open source intelligence, business intelligence from a business intelligence perspective, right? Like they know how to do that like nobody's business. It was pretty mind blowing to see the things that they're doing from a business intelligence perspective using open source, really knowing it. The same with Florida State University. Florida State University, for their crisis management folks, they're doing some incredible open source work from a crisis management perspective for if an event happens around the campus. How do I use open source information? How do I gather it? How do I report on it? How do I disseminate it to the right people? They're going through a full intelligence cycle, not being intelligence professionals in a sense, but they're going through an entire intelligence cycle with the information they're gathering for events. I mean, you take something like an FSU football game and the amount of people that draws and the attention that can draw. And you see them say from a security, a safety, an emergency management perspective, they're looking at everything and they're monitoring everything and they're reporting on everything. I mean, it's pretty amazing. And they're doing stuff at the state level for folks that they've been asked to do. So finding one of those programs from an education perspective and being a part of it prepare you quite well as well. Shawn?
Yeah, not much to add. I mean, I always use the example of the generation today is native born, right? When it comes to technology, they're used to it. They were born with a phone in their hand. They have it, so they know how to do it. So really the big thing is, just like Dennis said, it's those other skills that we're looking for. We're going to train you because we're going to want to make sure that from an oversight and compliance standpoint, just as we talked about protecting civil liberties and those, that you truly understand what you can or can't do to do that. But the ability to navigate the internet comes relatively easy for them. It's also for us made recruitment pretty easy. I mean, it's they get it. It's just a matter of, hey, we're going to get you properly trained so that what you're doing, and then we're going to equip you with capabilities that really help you do your job. Okay, and so those to me are the other two things that we can bring to it. But otherwise, other than some technical positions that we may have or things that you need technical expertise in it, really, if you got the willingness to, like you said, just more critical thinking and the ability to absorb lots of information and kind of sort through it all, those are probably the big takeaways of what we're looking for.
So be able to think critically, be insanely curious, and then be willing to learn what the Army needs from you. Is that a good way to sum it up?
Good way to sum it up. And we'll all those bad habits that you learn, we'll help do away with those bad habits, and we'll help you put some tradecraft behind it.
I love it. Do away with your bad habit. I love it. Are there any final comments from you?
I'll start quickly. I'd just like to say, first of all, thanks for the ability to do this. I think it's really important that we get the word out, that folks understand what open source intelligence is, what PAI is. But I think it's even more important. I think if I leave here today, the one thing that I would stress more than anything is that we're not collecting your personal information. We're not invading your privacy, and we're taking great steps to ensure that doesn't happen. I think that's the big message, because I get it. We're at a time in this world where there are a lot of concerns about privacy, and I understand. I don't do social media generally myself for a lot of different reasons. Clearly, because I know what can be done with it, but I think it's important from a privacy perspective that we get the word out. And my final thought would be, we are really, from an Army perspective, we're moving out and we're doing it pretty fast, pretty furious, and it's kind of a no holds barred approach to us. I've told my leadership, if you need to reel me in. But if you're not going to reel me in, I am going to continue to cut a path where none existed. So, and we're having a lot of great success in the Army. But I want to say thanks. I appreciate you having us on, because I think it's an important topic that everyone understands. Shawn?
Yeah, hey, I would just conclude with echoing what Dennis said. Hey, we're not here to collect on U.S. mission or our
Shawn,
responsibility.
you're breaking up a lot. I'm sorry to interrupt you. Yeah.
Yeah. How's that? Can you hear me now?
Yes, much better.
Okay, I'm just going to hold this course here to do that. So what I would say is the enemy definitely is collecting on you, and the enemy's got some robust capability, and so we've got to stay at the forefront of this, moving forward, provide greater capability to our force so that we can go out to counter what it is that the enemy is doing against our people. So otherwise, thanks so much for having us today. Apologize for the bad mic here, but truly appreciate getting a chance to talk about Army OSINT.
You're welcome. Thank you for your time today, but also for all that you're doing to keep our nation secure. I really appreciate it, and keep on fighting the good fight and moving forward. Jim, over to you for final comments.
Well, this has been a fascinating conversation about a critical topic that's only going to become more important in the future. I really want to thank Dennis Eger, Shawn Nilius, Jennifer Daniel, and U.S. Army OSINT for a great presentation.
Thanks, James.
AFIO is a small, nonprofit, apolitical, educational organization whose main mission is to help prepare the next generation of intelligence officers to confront the challenges our nation faces in the years ahead. To learn more or support our outreach programs, visit www.afio.com.